Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started and have people just trickle in. So welcome. I think, yeah, we have kind of a small group today, but I'm hoping, I know people are going to be watching this too. It's over lunch, so it would have been hard for people, but that's okay. So we want to welcome LaBeija, Lauren, and Stefan. Did I say, I think maybe even though we just talked about it, I kind of butchered it a little bit, but wanted to welcome you all. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time today to talk about your career with renewable energy or sustainable energy, which I think we kind of pinned it here. But if each of you guys could go around and say kind of what your career path was. You can even start, before Eisenberg, and then some of your Eisenberg experience, and then what you're doing now. And then we can jump into some questions. So if anyone wants to go first.
Sure, I'll go. So I'm a UMass MBA class of 05. Before that, I worked at KPMG. So I did I'm originally from Uganda. So I worked in Uganda for KPMG. So I did the CPAs, and so I'm a CPA, and then came to UMass, did an MBA. Went into investment banking after the UMass MBA, which is a story in and of itself, because you don't get too many UMass students going into investment banking. And then I left that and joined a power company called NRG. That's headquartered in Princeton, New Jersey. And in 2009, during the recession, this program was started called investment tax credit. And companies said, NRG said, hey, we're gonna invest a bunch of money in solar and get good returns on our capital because of the investment tax credit. So I was part of the team that was deployed on that, and they moved me to California to join their team, which I did, and we did that for 6 years. Built up a pretty big company that's now publicly traded called Clearway, and I left them and joined a different company in 2016 to help build their solar platform called Avangrid in Portland, Oregon, where I'm now based. And then did that for about 4 years. And then last year, a colleague of mine and I left Avangrid and started a business called Triple Oak Power, which I'm the chief financial officer of. And what we have is backing from a private equity firm, and our focus is wind development. So we're developing onshore wind farms, which will be ready in the second half of this decade, because wind takes a long time to develop. So that's my story. Pass the baton on to the next person.
I can go next. I'm curious, LaBeija, did you say onshore or offshore wind?
Onshore.
Onshore. Okay.
Yeah, we're the old school guys at this point.
Yeah. So my name's Lauren Rothermick. I have recently entered the energy field. So my background is in environmental science, and I did consulting in the air emissions field for 5 years before deciding to go get my MBA at UMass. I graduated in 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. And so I ended up in the energy field a little bit by accident. It was sort of my second choice, but I'm glad it really worked out. So I work for a small consulting firm in Worcester, Massachusetts, and we specialize in helping our clients in sort of a multifaceted way. So we help them make decisions around infrastructure, regulations, and energy markets. So we design customized solutions for all of our clients based on their individual needs. And so we do work with a lot of renewable developers. We work with utilities, we work with state agencies. So it's very varied work, which is exciting. And yeah, very, very happy to be here to talk to you all.
All right, my name is Stefan Wallenberg. I got into sustainability and clean energy when I did a high school semester program where you kind of like live on a farm, and they had fuel cells, they had solar, and you had to cut down all of the wood that you had to use your cabin over the winter. So I was hooked on sustainability there. I also met my wife there. So like generally it had a big impact on my future trajectory. In undergrad, I studied environmental studies and economics. I'm one of the few people of my college friends that is doing something that sounds like the major that they got, which makes me feel boring, but I say just makes me focused. So I worked right after college for a nonprofit that did a lot of work with renewable energy developers and with individuals and municipalities that were interested in sourcing their power from green energy. So we would basically go out and we would sign long-term contracts to purchase renewable energy certificates and energy from renewable energy developments. And then we would sell it to municipalities, again, other folks that wanted to be able to say that they were using clean energy. After that, I worked for a municipal aggregator where I was basically in charge of procuring energy, including renewable energy for the homes and businesses on Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard. And I also ran their municipal energy efficiency program. After that, I was an independent consultant for a year, went to Eisenberg. And then after that, I worked at National Grid, where I led their residential energy efficiency and demand response programs for a couple of years. And now I'm at a small consulting company called Sustainable Energy Advantage, where I do a lot of work on storage, energy storage, and some weird markets like the Massachusetts has this thing called the Clean Peak Standard. So Sustainable Energy Advantage does a lot of work primarily on renewable energy policy. So we do a lot of consulting with state energy offices that are looking to design policies that accomplish very specific objectives. And then on the flip side, we do a lot of work with developers, investors, owners, other folks that are looking to understand those policies, the ramifications for their pro formas, their projects, that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's a good time.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. To start off, I'll ask a question, then open it up to everyone else after this. But I'm curious, at your time at Eisenberg, if there were any specific courses that stuck out to you that are really helping you in your career today, or things that you suggest that students kind of look into, like specific topics, to start us off.
I can take that one first since I went last before.
Sure.
I guess what I would say is you can do anything within sustainability, right? Like there are lots of different functional roles. You can work in, you can work in finance. I'm pointing at Libby on my screen. You can work on really energy focused things. You could do procurement. Like you could do whatever you want within sustainability, within clean energy. So it's hard to say like this is the class that you need to take if you want to get into sustainability or clean energy. Like for me, I really enjoyed operations because it is sort of the sort of mindset, the way of approaching issues, the way of approaching operational efficiency, that sort of thing is really universally applicable regardless of your functional role or the industry that you work within. But potentially any of them, honestly. Not a useful answer, I understand, but that's my take.
Sure, I'll go. I guess I'll go next, and the way I'd frame it is, what did I do if I was going back to school now? It would probably be like largely policy focused, because I think policy has such a big impact on renewable energy and energy generally. So having a good understanding of how U.S. government policy is set, I think would be really valuable. The other thing that we look for when we interview people is critical thinking. So we actually use a case study model and use that to kind of understand how people think critically, and I think you can address that in different ways, but I would suggest doing things like independent studies and any classes that kind of enhance your critical thinking.
Yeah, so this is pretty fresh in my mind as well, since I graduated not long ago. And I totally agree with the prior answers so far. You can fit in the energy fields pretty much anywhere. So depending on your background, I feel like there's a spot for you. For me personally, what's been the most helpful, because I didn't come from a finance background, was finance and accounting basics. That was super helpful. Any sort of economic spaces as well comes into play a lot. And then if you are interested in and good at scripting, that sort of technical data manipulation is also, there's also roles for that as well. So if that's sort of your field, that's also useful.
Great, thank you guys so much. I will open it up to questions. I have a few more if no one jumps in, but I'll open it up to everyone else first.
Hi, I have a really not a sustainability question, but I'm James, by the way, so I'm hiding my face a little bit. But a quick question: I think I heard two people went to big organizations, and now they're working for like small consultancy organizations. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Like, why are you finding that smaller organizations are more effective than the big organizations? I'm trying to remember who said that, but I think the last person to introduce themselves said that.
I think it was both me and Lebea, and honestly, he's been at more large organizations than I have. Like the large organization was the exception for me. I will say that I forget who it was, but one of my Eisenberg professors did suggest for folks that were entering the field for the first time that sometimes it's worth considering trying to get a bigger name on your resume earlier on. I don't really know if I think that's that critical or if I necessarily agree with that. I think it can be helpful to have a recognizable name on a resume, but I don't know that it's that big of a deal. I think the reason that I in my career, because I'm so focused on sustainability, I have found that there's sort of this trade-off between the scale of your impact and your ability to directly influence the specifics of something, right? So when I was working at smaller organizations, I had a lot more agency, so I can make a lot more decisions myself. I could operate more independently. I could do things more quickly, but I might be influencing hundreds of megawatts, or I might be influencing a relatively small scale of outputs, right? Like my impact on sustainability, if you think of it in terms of like gross carbon emissions or something like that, was very small. At a larger organization at National Grid, I made this conscious decision where I said, I want to be able to increase the scale of my potential impact. I want to work at a big company that works across, that just has a larger impact. And that was definitely the case at National Grid. But the trade-off was that it is a larger organization, which means there is a lot more coordination. There are a lot more decision makers. There are a lot more people that you have to work with and around sometimes. You're subject to much greater scrutiny in many cases. This was a regulated utility, so there's an enormous amount of scrutiny. So for me, I've been sort of trying to find that balance in my career for fulfillment's sake, and just day-to-day enjoyment of my job, between sort of the individual agency I have to make decisions and feel like I'm creating something or influencing things, versus understanding what the actual scope of what I can control, what I can impact is. So I don't know if that's exactly what you're talking about, James, but that was sort of the consideration that I've had in looking at different size companies.
That makes sense. No, I was really curious about that. Like, big companies might have a wider reach, so that's what I was thinking about. Like, it could be more impactful, but I really don't know, because I don't know what smaller organizations can do, and I think you answered it really well. So before I go, one last question is, if any of you have any thoughts about the COP26, the COP, the United Nations Climate Change Conference. And if there's anything that you guys feel like they're not talking about that is really important today and in the future, that maybe as students we could start thinking about as we maybe think about our careers in sustainability.
I'm not the policy guy, Lauren. I'm looking at you on my screen.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will admit that I have not been following the conference that closely. I definitely plan to follow up. But anything that involves, this coming together of different groups, setting goals, you just have to make sure that everyone's on the same page and that everyone, is going to follow through. And you can't really, that's hard to guarantee. So I think that the most important thing that we can work on is how do we get our country to follow through on our goals. That's what we have control over. Unfortunately, we really can't control what other countries do. We can lead the way, we can set the good examples. But I think it really needs to start here. And until recently, that hadn't really been happening. And it's certainly happening now, which is good to see. But I think, any sort of change you can make locally is always a good first step, because it's something you have control over. It sort of can snowball into something bigger. But that's how change happens, slowly, piecemeal. So I would focus on what we can do here, in your state, in your country, and whatever you seem to be passionate about. In terms of sustainability, maybe it's not energy, maybe it's, clean water or sustainable sourcing or anything like that. It's easier to prioritize those things instead of trying to tackle everything all at once.
I would just say, like, from a technology perspective, a lot of people would talk about, like, long duration storage, or what are we going to do with natural gas infrastructure? And those are all big things, but people are sort of talking about them. One of the less sexy things that I think is really critical is just how we cite things. Transmission siting is a huge issue. With the reality is that with more intermittent, non-dispatchable resources, not only are you going to need more storage, but you're going to need to be able to move a lot of energy across much longer distances, which is all good and fine. But if no one will allow you to build a new transmission line anywhere near you, then you're not going to be able to get it done. There's a really interesting, thing that's playing out in Maine right now, where Massachusetts has contracted to purchase all of its hydropower from Canada. And so they had cited this transmission line called the Northeast Clean Energy Connect, Northeast New England, I'm not sure. But there was a ballot initiative in Maine that basically tried to overturn the ability for construction to proceed on that. So, and that's just like one example, but it's playing out all over the place. The other one, I'm geeking out here. The other one that I think is really interesting is climate engineering. There's all of this discussion about mitigation, so reducing the amount of emissions that we're emitting. But then the next thing is, well, can we find ways to, basically take carbon out of the atmosphere? And then sort of the most extreme thing is, well, can we literally do things to engineer the climate in order to create, at least in the short term, a more livable atmosphere, a more livable climate? I think that's super interesting. I don't understand anything about it because I don't have enough knowledge or brain power generally to get involved in that, but it is fascinating stuff to read about for sure.
That's great. I actually, kind of following up on that question is, what trends right now are you seeing that, we should maybe be looking into, that is kind of this maybe cutting edge technology or just new exciting things that any of your companies are doing, or I don't know, anything you guys are excited about that we should kind of keep on our radar?
So I think everyone probably knows about clean hydrogen. And that's one to be aware of, be reading about as you're going into interviews. And then there's also the concept of intermittency, which Stefan hinted at, which is the fact that when solar or wind is not blowing, you need something to fill the gap. So when people talk about storage and the the popular storage form of storage is lithium ion, and it's short term. And if you have a long winter event and there's no wind and there's no solar, then you need something to fill that gap. And then the Pacific Northwest, where I live, has disallowed, and even California, the building of new gas plants. So you can't build new gas, and old plants are being retired. So there's a real risk that in the mid-decade, you could end up with these blackouts because the wind and the sun is not, there's no wind, no sun, and there's no gas to fill the gap. So the solutions that I'm aware of are, one of them is pumped storage, which is a form of hydro, where you essentially, during high wind or solar hours, you pump water from a low point to a high point, and then you release that water when you need it later in the, when there's no wind or no solar, and that can last 6 hours plus. The challenge that pump storage faces is permitting. So everything kind of comes back to permitting. And then a related point to what Stefan said, I'm also on the transmission train, which is that we, as a nation, we face this challenge of getting transmission from one point to another, and energy from one point to another, because arguably there's enough renewable energy in this country to get to power the entire country. It's just that we're all these different states have different, kind of like electricity rules, and they're not necessarily connected. So in Montana, for example, there's enough wind in Montana to power a third of the country, but Montana has the least wind developed in the country. And that's primarily because it's a red state, because as we all know, renewables is a politicized issue in the country. So, and there's only one real transmission line coming out of Montana going to the Pacific Northwest. So, a new transmission coming out of a place like Montana, and you can power a lot of the country. So I guess, yeah, my topics, again, just to kind of summarize, keep an eye on hydrogen, all forms of hydrogen, keep an eye on transmission, as Stefan said, and then pump storage is another one. And then one final thing I'll say, which Stefan touched on, which I guess there was a question about big company, small company. I'm more of a proponent of small companies now, having been through big companies and small companies, because small companies can be entrepreneurial, and it just requires you as a prospective employee to do more diligence on that company, to understand, who are they backed by? Are they financially okay? What's their strategy? Does it make sense? And does it line up with your own beliefs? And what's their culture like? But I think working for a small company will be much more rewarding for all of us, because you have an impact, and again, they can make decisions quickly. And like what's happened nowadays is, in this sector, is like what happened to my company is essentially a private equity firm that historically backed oil and gas has taken that money and they're backing us as a renewable energy developer. And there's a lot of money backing what seem like small companies, but that really have the backing of big money. All right, long answer to the question.
I'll go next. I certainly agree with all those trends. A pretty broad and obvious trend is the electrification of our buildings and transportation. So I'm sure you are all aware of EVs and the progress that's been made. However, if we're going to meet our decarbonization goals, the adoption of EVs needs to accelerate a lot. And then there's also the complications of, when can we charge these? How do we make sure we don't overload the grid if we're all charging at once? Can we actually use the EVs as a grid asset? So can that battery of the EV actually give back to the grid when the grid needs energy? So there's a lot of really interesting interactions, I think, that's going to be occurring with EVs that we haven't really seen yet, but needs to happen soon. So that's definitely one trend to pay attention to. And then the other trend that I've been noticing is there's a lot more discussion about equity and environmental justice. So this is probably potentially born out of a lot of the discussions that have come about recently in terms of racial justice, but these concepts are slowly making their way into policy. So far, it's hard to see if any of them have a lot of teeth, but it's something that companies and utilities and states are starting to consider. But it's hard. A lot of people don't really know what those topics mean necessarily or how to go about them. So that's a huge policy potential if anyone has a policy background. That's definitely a trend to stay in touch with.
Awesome. And we did have a question in the chat from James of if or how that everyone can connect with you after this. Is that if that's like, via, or are you guys okay with LinkedIn or I'm not sure, email or whatever you guys are comfortable with?
Yeah, any of those. Totally have to talk to folks that are interested in getting into the field.
Yeah, same here.
Thank you. And then, so some of the people that have just joined, this is an open forum discussion or open forum questions. So if anyone that has just joined has questions, please feel free to ask away.
Hello, my name is Camilla. I'm almost finishing my MBA program online with UMass, and I hope to work, in analytics, although I don't have experience, prior experience, but I did applied mathematics for undergrad. So and with MBA, I'm hoping to get in that field. So maybe Lauren could help me to figure out how do I get a job in like data analytics or business analytics. I will definitely be looking in sustainable field because I've worked for Grid Alternatives. It's a nonprofit that installs solar for low-income families. So I do want to continue working in sustainability, for a company that's in sustainability.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. There's definitely opportunities for you here. So one avenue is working with markets and market data. So there are wholesale energy markets, and our company and many others build models with market data, trying to predict, a number of things, market prices, a number of things. So being able to build models, that's a big skill. Even just working with large data sets in general and being able to manipulate them. That's also another avenue. I would say, just general consulting firms, a lot of job postings I've seen have requested some sort of scripting knowledge, whether it's R or Python. That seems to be a pretty standard ask for consulting. So yeah, I would look into consulting firms.
And Lauren, would you recommend any data scripting classes at UMass? This semester I'm taking Python. I think they just recently offered that class. But would you recommend maybe maybe another in another programming language to learn, or at least start learning?
Yeah, I know we primarily use Python and R. I'm not sure if there's any more classes there that you could take. And I'm not sure, there might be other languages that others have come across. I think Stefan might have mentioned this, but doing an independent class, like a practicum or some sort of independent study class where you can design your own project and you can use your data skills, I think that's a great way to learn and practice, because taking a class is one thing, but then applying your skills is a whole nother thing. So if you have the opportunity to do that, I would certainly recommend that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, and I'll just I just posted in the chat our career page because we do have a couple openings open. But from our perspective, we are not very data heavy. I mean, we will do financial modeling, but I think you need an understanding of finance, and there are actually some project energy specific project finance classes that I recommend if UMass doesn't offer them, that I recommend people take, which I can share afterwards if people are interested.
Sure, thank you.
I know a couple of us have talked about the benefits of working for a smaller company. I will say that, like, if you get excited about data, you might consider working for a utility because they have the data. That was the other reason that I wanted to work for National Grid, was because I spent a lot of years sort of on the outside, like trying to peer in, trying to get more access to data. And when you work for the utility, you have it, man. And the problem there, if anything, is that they have more data than they actually have people to make any sense of all of it. So there's a huge need there, and there's a lot of interesting stuff that can be done there. So and they're always hiring folks that are solid with data. And so, yeah, I mean, Python and R are great languages. You know, depending on exactly what you want to do, you know, any data visualization tools are going to be valuable too. So I'm sure that you've done that in some of the required classes, but yeah, you might consider looking at utilities.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Can I ask a direct question to LaBeija? And I think you were here last semester, I believe, I think with another colleague of yours, and you had another talk. I don't know if it was in sustainability or whatever it was. So I guess my question is, some of these jobs look like things that some people could do, but if somebody does not have past experience in, say, sustainability or exactly what you are saying in this field, but they can do it based on what we've learned. Like, for example, I'm doing an MBA, and I think, for example, I'm just going to say the business project analyst is something that I think I could do. What's your, how do you give them grace to learn how to actually do the job very well, or do you want somebody who's like really experienced? And I guess my point is I don't want to apply for something that I'm not going to be competitive at as a candidate.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the analyst role is an entry-level position where we're really looking for somebody with finance training in that role, with some and then also then yeah, you're going to learn on the job, frankly. So that one's an entry-level role. The other roles on the page are more, we're looking for people with more experience. So yeah, if anyone's interested and they can demonstrate passion for sustainability and renewable energy, and they've done some low level of finance, please apply, but reach out to me as well, and we can have a conversation.
Can I throw out some unsolicited advice? One thing that I just want to throw out there, because this has come up in a couple of interviews that I've done lately, is just like, if you're looking to get into clean energy and it's not something that you have a background in, totally fine, right? That's great. Like demonstrating interest, demonstrating some of the skills, all of those things are going to be super helpful and will probably land you a job. One thing that I would suggest though is that, and everyone expects for there to be on-the-job training, right? That's true of everything, but energy in particular is often very specific. Like the policies are different in every state. Like everyone's going to expect that you're going to have to learn a lot of what you do on the job when it comes to the specifics of energy. That said, do something to show in advance of the interview that you are going to be able to do some of that learning on your own. Like I've done a couple of interviews lately where folks just had no idea, like what the company was, what the role was, like what the industry was, just nothing. So like it doesn't have to be, hours and hours of work. Like go to the company's website, read about the stuff that they've done. If they have a blog post, like read a couple of the blog posts so that you have something to say. Like, again, it's not to show that you know everything, it's to show that you are interested, you're a self-starter, and while you are going to get trained on the job, you're going to be able to do a lot of that on your own. I just like throw that out there because that's come up a couple times recently.
So I agree with Stefan. So again, I think I mentioned earlier that I went from UMass to Credit Suisse, and the way I figured it out was I bought all these books on interviewing and kind of learning what, frankly, I taught in classes at some of the bigger business schools. And I know we have, I think I've met Tristan. I know she's gonna try to help address that, but some of the stuff which, how to prepare for an interview, how to even apply for jobs and kind of stand out, which our competitor schools do better than us, or at least back whatever 10 years ago, is something which you can address by doing what Stefan suggested. The other piece of advice I have is, please do not be one of those people who just applies to every job, like on LinkedIn. Like I personally just delete when I get a resume with no note and just like, it's obvious someone just clicked apply. I don't even bother to review those. So I'm a big believer in, pick a few and go deep, read about them, express your passion for that role, and do a real application. Okay.
I have a question. I joined late, so I apologize if this has been asked already. But how do you personally deal with frustrations, whether in policy, if you find that policy is not moving in the direction that you want, or just general, how do you deal with general cynicism about climate change and the future of sustainability?
I'm going to volunteer Lauren because I liked what Lauren was saying before on this one.
That's interesting. So this, I was on a conference last night with, it was a group for women in energy and the environment. A very similar question was asked. Basically, how do you stay motivated that you're doing the best that you can and making change that you can? And so I'm going to sort of paraphrase the answer that I thought was best last night. But basically, it's just focus on what you can do. And like I said earlier, starting local is always a good place to start because you have control over it. You can see the impact of your work. And something that I had to realize, after graduating with an environmental science degree and, wanting to do everything I could, was that you can't, one person isn't gonna, solve the problem, save the world. It needs to be everyone. So you just have to do your part, and you just have to figure out what part that's going to be. So whether you're passionate about energy, you're passionate about some other aspect of sustainability, if you can figure out what that is and go do it, and just know that you're doing your part, and that's really all that we can do. In terms of influencing policy, it's frustrating. I have a mentor right now who works in government, and she's expressed her frustration about how slowly things move and how one person can sort of hold up, an entire bill. So I guess there is that, you just have to keep trying and not give up and hope that eventually things get passed, because I think eventually they will. I think we'll eventually all get there. But it is frustrating, and you just have to be patient and not give up.
So one thing I'll throw out that I read recently is the concept of process goals, and as opposed to kind of long-term goals. So because of what Lauren described about what you can control versus what you can't, you can control, the stuff you do on a daily basis, and those should be your goals. And the other thing which we do as developers is we celebrate the small wins. So if you're developing a wind farm, it's a 5-year time horizon. So we're developing stuff that's gonna come online 2025 plus. So no idea if we'll actually get there, but we know that, hey, we get this landowner and we sign him up and we sign a lease with him. We celebrate, we procure some piece of equipment. We're successful, getting that contract, we celebrate. So I think it's important to celebrate the small wins and just control your process, which is what you can control.
Thank you.
I just make a comment on that too. Sorry, I joined late as well. Maybe this was addressed, but I feel like UMass could do more in that sense too, like control the things they can control. I just started my MBA program this past year, and the concept of climate change and sustainability it hasn't been mentioned in most of my classes. And I can't believe that. If we're going to be business leaders, how are we going to go up and be prepared to make change in our leadership roles in business if we're not having the training in our program? And I think it's a miss. I think for the university, I don't know if anyone does that in their MBA programs, but it's an opportunity to help train us, and address the issues so that we can bring forth change. So.
I think that's a great point, Steve. And I honestly, I had sort of the same reaction when I was doing my MBA. I will say that the UMass system, like on a larger scale, has a lot of really cool stuff going on. UMass has, I forget exactly what it's called. I think it's an extension center where one of the former commissioners of the DOER worked, at least as of a couple of years ago. And they do a lot of cool work on policy, not just within UMass, but also supporting, municipalities that are developing policies or looking at implementing specific, technology or something like that. So that's something to look at into, obviously there are classes outside of Eisenberg that are more sustainability focused. And then there's also a lot of, at undergrad, the way that I got excited and continue to be committed to clean energy was through a class that was focused exclusively on applied sustainability at school, like at Brown. And I'm sure there have to be opportunities for that at Eisenberg, or at UMass. UMass they've developed a couple of batteries. I bet they're not using their batteries very effectively based on what I've seen in a couple of instances. There could be a cool project if you have any interest in data, in helping them figure out how to more effectively dispatch their batteries. I would totally agree with you, and I do think that it's something that needs to be better reflected within the MBA program itself. But within the UMass system, there are opportunities if you're looking to include that as a part of sort of your educational experience.
Great, thanks.
I just wanted to piggyback off. Sorry. Oh, sorry. I was going to just piggyback off what Stephen just said, and Stefan. I'm sorry, and say that if you go looking for anything that you want to do at UMass, you will find it. So including some sustainability courses. But I would defer to your advisor because the MBA program seems to be designed a particular way. I think Trista is here. She can probably talk about that a little more. But if you go looking for sustainability courses or experiential stuff on campus or with some other organizations that have, let's say, as an internship, for example, you'll find stuff. But I see what you're saying, but I think there are people that are in other sectors. Like, for example, I'm a big fan of supply chain. I don't see enough of supply chain stuff on in the MBA program, but they're there. If you look hard enough, you'll find it.
I would just say where I found the most success too is just applying my MBA knowledge to the area that I want to. So I think this was mentioned, but seeking out those internships or independent studies and really designing what you want to get out of that. That sort of helped me fill some of the holes I thought in the areas that I wanted to pursue. So agree that it's definitely not perfect, but as much as you can do to help fill in those gaps yourself, I would encourage it.
Hi, I joined late, but I had a question. So I'm coming from a finance background and I'm interested in sustainability, but I want to move away from finance and more into communications. I I was wondering if you could talk about like the opportunities within that field, and if you have any advice for me. I'm trying to get into the writing side of sustainability.
So, Sophia, hey, this is Labeja. So I have a finance background too. And I guess you said you're thinking about more of a communications role.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess, and others can speak to this. I know the communications roles I'm aware of are really kind of the public facing roles for the company. So kind of there's investor relations for public companies. And I think, your larger companies will have roles like, Nextera, Avangrid, any of the big renewable energy companies will have roles in investor relations, which will involve kind of explaining financial data to the market, which I think is a natural fit for you. And then the other person I'm thinking about who does not have financial training is the person who handles our press releases, which I don't think is probably a good fit for you. So I would say investor relations type roles would probably be a good fit for you. But ask again if I'm not really answering your question, please.
No, that's I have looked into investor relation roles. I guess I would ideally in my mind would want to be like a communications manager within CSR or like sustainability within an organization. So yeah, I was just curious if you had any advice for me on that.
And I didn't hear the role. You said CSR. Say that again, Sophia.
Yeah, CSR, corporate social responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, for us, so we're a 10-person company, so we don't have that level of specialization at our firm. But maybe Stefan or Lauren can speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say something similar. We're like a 30-person firm or something like that. So I think that to get into something that's really communications focused, unless you're also ready to get down and dirty with some marketing, like you're probably going to be looking at a larger company. Like there are tons of marketing roles across all sorts of organizations, but for something that's really communications focused, I think Labeja is dead on. Like I think you're probably going to have to look for a bigger company, especially if you want to get into something specific like CSR communications. But I would imagine that there are probably a good number of opportunities out there. I just don't have a ton of specific like firsthand knowledge of that.
I would echo the marketing aspect. I know our marketing director, she was an engineer actually before she transitioned to being our marketing director. So if you're interested in marketing, that might be one angle to sort of get into the communications space. I know I was looking into CSR a lot when I was in grad school, and they are notoriously difficult jobs to get because everyone wants them. So whatever sort of, special expertise you could bring, I would definitely try to play that up.
Thank you.
One more question. I was wondering to ask you, I've been thinking about looking for a job like at a waste management companies. And I was wondering if you guys know if, maybe any particular waste management company is really good at recycling and like sustainability. Yeah, like if you have anything in mind, like for a good company to, work for.
I have a friend that works in sustainability at Waste Management. To hear him tell it, they're very good at it. I'm skeptical myself, but I would imagine that like a company like Waste Management might be as good as any. And it's a huge company, so they would have a ton of positions that would be open, I would imagine, at any given time. Yeah, but that is my limited insight there.
So I'll throw out, so Camilla, I think waste management is one of those areas that's a growth area. So Halloween, I was hanging out with the CFO of a waste management company, and his business takes, I think it's like wastewater. And I think we all know what wastewater is, but basically the stuff that comes out of the toilet, and then burns it into some sort of gas that's then transported to California and is sold. And I think it then goes into trucks. So then it powers trucks. And they're doing really well. They have backing from another private equity firm. So there's money in this area, in this arena as well. So I think it's a great idea. Happy to follow up with you after this, and I can find the contact and introduce you. But I think it's a great area to look at.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one or two more questions if anyone has any.
Well, I'll say, Adrian, I think you and Sarah set this up, and kudos to both of you for setting this up. I know you're both busy with school and stuff, so I'm happy to stay involved in helping folks and participate in more of these. So
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, a huge thank you for everyone taking the time to join us today. That was really cool.
Yeah, I actually do have one final question if no one else does. So I'm very interested in this field, and I think my concern, and you guys have addressed a lot of it, is that I do not have any background in this. And I think a couple of you or all of you did in your undergrad. So I'm curious, besides me, and maybe this is just, me doing my own research, which I have done a lot of, how I can differentiate myself besides to just bringing a specific skill set, to an interview. And maybe that is just, doing research on the company, but are there any certifications or any specific things to look into that could help us differentiate ourselves? That might be a loaded question, but just curious.
I think that LaBeja spoke to this before, but I think part of it is figuring out what you want your role to be. It's not enough to just say that you're interested in sustainability, because being interested in sustainability isn't a job. And that it doesn't require that you have experience. It just requires that you tell the company what the benefit is that you're going to be able to bring to them. So, if that's analytics, if it's communications, if whatever it is, right? It is trying to specifically relay to them what it is that you're going to be doing, instead of taking sort of a shotgun approach and saying well, what if I did this, or what if I did this? So it's, and I think that makes it hard to provide feedback on certifications that would be valuable, because it really depends on what you want to do. If you're interested in building energy consumption, you might want to get a CEM, a Certified Energy Manager certification. I generally, I don't really think it's as in vogue as it used to be. There's a period 5 years ago when I think every single person in sustainability had a lead AP accreditation. Honestly, I wouldn't bother with that. When I see that, it sort of indicates to me generally that someone wants to do sustainability, but maybe doesn't have a specific angle. So I think that again, it's focusing on some of the skills that you might be able to bring, instead of just getting a certification just to have a certification that says you're interested in sustainability. So if you want to do, analytics, maybe it's doing a more specific class in Tableau or something like that. Yeah.
I would say my advice, it would be to just talk to people. If you don't know exactly what you want to do, what I did a lot of was reach out on LinkedIn to some of my contacts, and I did informational interviews, and I learned what their jobs were and what their companies did, more than you can glean from just looking at them on the internet. So that was really helpful, just in learning what kind of jobs were out there, because sometimes it's hard to tell. So that sort of helped guide what I wanted to search for and the things that I thought I could bring to the table. So that's what I would advise.
Yeah, same thing with so Stefan was right, like be focused, and the only way you can be focused is do those informational interviews, ask a lot of questions, and then when you do the real interview, you know, like, all right, this is how the company is set up. So like ideally, you know, leverage your LinkedIn and talk to as many people as you can.
Thank you all so much. Sincerely appreciate all of you coming. Any final, is everyone good?
I gotta go.
Yeah, thank you. So everyone, you guys have their LinkedIn if you all want to reach out, and thank you all for coming, and thank you, Stefan, Lauren, and LaBeija for talking to us today.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, Sarah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.